The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the Silver Spur Hotel, just as the sun began its descent behind the ragged peaks of the Colorado Rockies. And when the door swung open, out stepped a woman whose green eyes held secrets that would change everything Caleb Morgan thought he knew about love. Caleb had been leaning against the hitching post outside the hotel, his worn leather boots crossed at the ankle, watching the dust settle from the coach's arrival in the mountain town of Copper Ridge. It was June of 1876, and the summer air carried the scent of pine and wildflowers down from the higher elevations. He had come into town to pick up supplies for the ranch he worked on 15 miles west, but something made him pause when he saw her step down onto the wooden boardwalk. She wore a traveling dress of deep blue, now dusty from the long journey, and her dark hair was pinned up beneath a modest hat. But it was the way she moved that caught his attention, a careful deliberateness, as though she was measuring every step in unfamiliar territory. She clutched a worn leather suitcase in one hand and a smaller carpetbag in the other, and when the stage driver tossed down a trunk from the top of the coach, she flinched at the impact it made against the dirt street. Caleb straightened, his hand instinctively moving to tip his hat, though he caught himself halfway through the gesture. He was 26 years old, had been working cattle and horses since he was 14, and he had learned long ago not to get involved in the business of strangers passing through town. But something about the uncertainty in her posture made him push away from the post and cross the street. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough from disuse. He cleared his throat. "Can I help you with that trunk?" She turned to look at him, and up close he could see the exhaustion etched into her features. Delicate freckles dusted her nose, and there were shadows beneath those remarkable green eyes. She looked to be in her early 20s, and there was something refined about her that spoke of eastern cities and parlors far removed from this rough mining town. "That would be kind of you," she said, and her voice held the crisp accent of New England. "I am staying at this hotel, I believe." Caleb bent and hefted the trunk onto his shoulder. It was heavier than he expected, and he wondered what she carried with her. "Just arriving in Copper Ridge." "Yes," she said simply, offering no further explanation as she followed him into the hotel lobby. The Silver Spur was one of the better establishments in town, which was not saying much. The lobby held a threadbare carpet, a desk manned by a balding clerk named Patterson, and a sitting area with furniture that had seen better days. But it was clean, and the rooms were said to be decent enough for travelers who needed a place to rest between the bigger towns along the Front Range. Caleb set the trunk down near the desk and stepped back, touching his hat brim this time. "Welcome to Copper Ridge, ma'am." "Thank you," she said, and for the first time a small smile touched her lips. "You have been very helpful." He should have left then. Should have walked out the door, collected his supplies, and ridden back to the ranch where he had work waiting. But he found himself hesitating, wanting to know her name, wanting to understand what had brought someone like her to a place like this. Patterson cleared his throat loudly. "You checking in, miss?" "Yes," she said, turning to the clerk. "I have a reservation. The name is Abigail Winters." Caleb committed the name to memory as he finally forced himself to leave the hotel. Outside, the evening was settling in properly now, the shadows lengthening across the main street. He could hear piano music drifting from one of the saloons, and somewhere a dog was barking. The town was coming alive with the end of the workday, miners and ranch hands and drifters all looking for entertainment or trouble or both. He collected his supplies from the general store, loaded them onto his horse, and started the ride back toward the ranch. But his mind kept drifting to Abigail Winters and the sadness he had glimpsed behind her polite smile. 3 days passed before Caleb had reason to return to town. The ranch foreman, a gruff man named Hutchins, sent him in to pick up a special order of tack that had arrived on the train. It was mid-morning when Caleb rode down the main street, and he told himself he was not looking for any sign of the dark-haired woman from Boston or wherever she had come from. But fate or chance or something else entirely intervened. As he was securing his horse outside the leather goods shop, he heard a commotion from the direction of the hotel. A man's voice was raised in anger, and then he heard a woman's voice, quieter but firm, trying to reason with him. Caleb moved without thinking, his long strides eating up the distance. When he rounded the corner, he saw Abigail Winters standing on the boardwalk outside the hotel, facing a red-faced man in a rumpled suit. The man was gesturing wildly, and even from several yards away, Caleb could smell the whiskey coming off him. "You cannot just run away from your obligations," the man was saying, his words slurring slightly. "Your father made promises and you will honor them." "I have made no such promises," Abigail said, her voice steady despite the way her hands were clenched at her sides. "And I would appreciate it if you would leave me alone, Mr. Thornton." "I came all this way to fetch you back," Thornton said, reaching out to grab her arm. "And by God, you are coming with me." Caleb was there before the man's fingers could close around her wrist. He stepped between them, his 6-foot frame blocking Thornton from reaching Abigail. "The lady asked you to leave her alone," he said quietly. Thornton stumbled back a step, his bleary eyes trying to focus on this new obstacle. "This is none of your concern, Cowboy. This is a private family matter." "Did not sound very private," Caleb said, "and it does not look like she wants to talk to you." "Do you know who I am?" Thornton blustered. "I am Theodore Thornton of the Boston Thorntons. My family has business connections throughout the entire eastern seaboard." "That is real impressive," Caleb said without a trace of emotion. "But you are in Colorado now and the lady wants you to leave." For a moment, it looked like Thornton might try to push past him. But something in Caleb's stance, in the way his hand rested easily near the gun on his hip, must have penetrated the whiskey fog. Thornton took another step back, his face mottling with rage and humiliation. "This is not over, Abigail," he said, pointing a shaking finger at her. "You belong to my family, whether you like it or not." He turned and staggered down the street toward one of the saloons. Caleb watched him go, making sure he was truly leaving before turning to Abigail. Up close in the morning light, he could see that she was trembling slightly, though her face remained composed. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded, though her hands were still clenched. "Thank you. He has been bothering me since he arrived yesterday. I had hoped he would give up and return east, but he is quite persistent." "Old friend of the family?" Caleb asked carefully. A bitter smile touched her lips. "Something like that. My father owed his family a considerable sum of money. Before my father died 6 months ago, he agreed to settle the debt by arranging a marriage between myself and Theodore's younger brother." "But you do not want to marry his brother," Caleb said. "It was not a question." "I do not," she said firmly. "I have never even met the man. And when Theodore came to collect me, as if I were a piece of property to be delivered, I decided I had had quite enough of being told what to do with my life." Caleb found himself smiling despite the seriousness of the situation. "So you ran away to Colorado?" "I did," she said, and now there was a hint of defiance in her voice. "I took what little money I had left and bought a ticket on the first train heading west. I thought if I could just get far enough away, they would eventually give up and leave me alone." "But Thornton followed you," Caleb said. "Yes," she sighed, some of the energy draining from her. "I should have known he would. The Thorntons do not like to be thwarted." Caleb looked down the street where Thornton had disappeared. "He is drunk now, but he might try again when he sobers up. Do you have anywhere else to stay?" "Anyone here who might help you?" Abigail shook her head. "I know no one in this town. I chose Copper Ridge because it seemed remote enough that they would not think to look for me here immediately. I was hoping to find employment, perhaps as a teacher or a seamstress, and make a new life for myself." An idea was forming in Caleb's mind, probably a foolish one, but he found himself speaking before he could think better of it. "The ranch where I work, the Double H, they are always looking for help. The foreman's wife, Mrs. Hutchins, she runs the house and does the cooking for the hands, but she has been complaining about needing someone to help with the mending and the washing. It would not be fancy work, but it would be honest employment and a place to stay away from town." Abigail looked at him with those green eyes, and he could see her weighing the offer, trying to decide if she could trust him. "You would do that for me? You do not even know me." "No, ma'am, I do not," Caleb admitted, "but I know a person running from something they should not have to face. And I reckon everyone deserves a chance to start fresh if they want it badly enough." She was quiet for a long moment, and Caleb could almost see the thoughts racing behind her eyes. Finally, she nodded. "Very well, I accept your offer, Mr. Morgan," he said. "Caleb Morgan, Mr. Morgan," she said, extending her hand in a surprisingly businesslike gesture. "I am grateful for your assistance." Her hand was small in his, but her grip was firm. Caleb felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer sun beating down on them. He released her hand quickly, suddenly aware that he was staring. "I need to pick up some supplies," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "If you can be ready to leave in about an hour, I can take you out to the ranch then." "I will be ready," Abigail said. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan, truly." Caleb touched his hat and walked away, his mind already racing ahead to how he was going to explain this to Hutchins. The foreman was a fair man but not particularly given to charity, and showing up with a strange woman and asking for her to be hired on the spot was going to take some explaining. But as he collected the tack and loaded it onto his horse, Caleb found he did not regret the impulse. There was something about Abigail Winters that called to him, something beyond her beauty or her evident distress. She had crossed half a continent to escape a life she did not want, and that took a kind of courage he respected. An hour later, Abigail was waiting outside the hotel with her trunk and bags. She had changed into a more practical dress of brown calico, and she wore a bonnet to shade her face from the sun. Caleb secured her trunk behind his saddle and helped her up onto his horse. She sat side saddle in front of him, stiff and uncertain, and he tried not to think about how close she was, how he could smell lavender in her hair. The ride to the ranch took them west out of town, following a track that wound through stands of ponderosa pine and aspen. The mountains rose dramatically on either side, their peaks still holding patches of snow despite the summer heat. They crossed a creek running fast with snowmelt, and Caleb pointed out a small herd of elk grazing in a meadow above them. Abigail slowly began to relax as they rode, her posture loosening as she took in the wild beauty of the landscape. "It is so different from home," she said softly. "Everything is so open, so vast." "Takes some getting used to," Caleb agreed. "When I first came out here from Missouri, I felt like the sky was too big, like it might swallow me up. But after a while, you start to appreciate all that space. Makes you feel like you can breathe deeper somehow." "How long have you been in Colorado?" she asked. "About 8 years now," he said. "Came out when I was 18, looking for work and adventure. Found plenty of the first and more of the second than I probably needed." She glanced back at him, curiosity evident in her expression. "What brought you west?" Caleb considered how much to tell her. "My father died when I was 16. My mother remarried a year later, and my stepfather made it clear he did not have much use for another man's son. So I left as soon as I was old enough and headed for the territories. Figured I could make my own way out here." "I am sorry about your father," Abigail said quietly. "It was a long time ago," Caleb said, though the old ache was still there if he let himself dwell on it. "What about yours? You said he passed 6 months ago." "Yes," she said, and he could hear the grief in her voice. "He had a bad heart. The doctors told him to slow down, to stop working so hard, but he would not listen. He collapsed at his office one day and never woke up." "That must have been hard," Caleb said. "It was," Abigail said, "but what made it worse was discovering afterward how much debt he had accumulated. He had tried to expand his import business, and he had made some poor investments. The Thorntons loaned him a substantial sum, and when he could not repay it, he promised them me instead." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. Caleb felt his jaw tighten. That was not right of him. "No," she agreed. "I loved my father, but he was a man who always believed things would work out somehow. He never could face unpleasant realities. I think he genuinely believed I would be happy with the arrangement, that I should be grateful to marry into a wealthy family. But you were not grateful, Caleb said. I was furious, Abigail said with unexpected vehemence. I had spent my whole life being an obedient daughter, doing what was expected of me. And then to discover that even in death, my father was still trying to control my future, to trade me away like a commodity to settle his debts. She stopped, taking a breath. I am sorry, I should not burden you with all of this. You are not burdening me, Caleb said. Sometimes it helps to talk about things. They rode in silence for a while after that, and Caleb found himself very aware of her presence, the way her shoulder occasionally brushed against his chest, the way the sun caught glints of auburn in her dark hair. He told himself to stop being foolish. She was running from one unwanted entanglement. The last thing she needed was him developing feelings for her. The Double H came into view as they crested a ridge. The ranch buildings sat in a broad valley with a river running through it, the water glinting silver in the afternoon sun. There was a main house, a bunkhouse, several barns, and a maze of corrals where horses moved restlessly in the heat. Cattle dotted the hillsides beyond, small dark shapes against the golden grass. It is beautiful, Abigail said, and there was genuine wonder in her voice. It is good land, Caleb agreed. The owner, Henry Hutchins, he built this place up from nothing about 20 years ago. He is a tough man but fair, and he takes care of his people. They rode down into the ranch yard, and several of the hands looked up from their work to stare at the woman sitting in front of Caleb. He ignored their curious looks and headed straight for the main house, a sturdy log structure with a wide porch and real glass windows. Hutchins himself was on the porch, a tall man in his 50s with iron-gray hair and a weathered face. His wife Martha stood beside him, a plump woman with kind eyes and flour dusting her apron. They both watched as Caleb dismounted and helped Abigail down from the horse. Hutchins, Caleb said, touching his hat brim in respect. Mrs. Hutchins, I hope I am not overstepping, but I have brought someone who might be able to help around the place. He quickly explained the situation, leaving out the more personal details but making it clear that Abigail needed work and a safe place to stay. Hutchins listened with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable, but Martha's face softened as she looked at Abigail. When Caleb finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Martha stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron. Well now, she said in a warm voice, it just so happens I could use another pair of hands around here. These men go through clothes faster than I can mend them, and the washing alone is enough to keep two women busy. I would be happy to help, Abigail said quickly. I am a hard worker and I can sew and cook and clean. I would earn my keep. Hutchins grunted, but his expression had softened slightly. We can give you a trial period, room and board plus a small wage. If it works out, we will talk about something more permanent. Fair enough. More than fair, Abigail said, relief evident in her voice. Thank you, Mr. Hutchins. Do not thank me yet, Hutchins said gruffly. You have not seen how much work there is to do around here. Martha will get you settled in the spare room off the kitchen. Morgan, get her things and bring them inside. Caleb did as he was told, carrying Abigail's trunk and bags into the house while Martha led her away, already chattering about the daily routine and what would be expected. When he set the trunk down in the small but clean room that would be Abigail's, she turned to him with genuine gratitude in her eyes. I cannot thank you enough, Mr. Morgan, she said. You have saved me from a very difficult situation. Just Caleb, he said, and you are welcome. I hope it works out for you here. I hope so too, she said, and then she smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and made his heart do something complicated in his chest. He left before he could say something foolish and headed back outside to the bunkhouse where he lived with the other ranch hands. The men were already full of questions about the pretty woman he had brought back from town, and Caleb fielded them with as little detail as possible. But that night, lying in his bunk and listening to the others snore, He found himself thinking about green eyes and auburn hair and a woman brave enough to cross a continent in search of freedom. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. Caleb rose before dawn with the other hands, worked cattle and horses until his muscles ached, and caught glimpses of Abigail around the ranch as she went about her duties. She proved to be everything she had promised, working hard without complaint, and Martha Hutchins took to her immediately. But it was the small moments that stayed with Caleb. The way Abigail looked up from the washing and smiled at him when he rode past. The sound of her laugh drifting from the kitchen when Martha said something amusing. The evening he found her sitting on the porch steps, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, and she made room for him to sit beside her without a word. They talked on those evenings when their work was done and the night was settling in. She told him about growing up in Boston, about her mother who had died when she was 12, about the books she loved to read and the music she missed hearing. He told her about Missouri, about learning to rope and ride, about the time he nearly got trampled by a spooked steer and the scar on his shoulder from a horse that had not wanted to be broken. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked one evening. "Missouri, I mean your home." Caleb considered the question. "Sometimes I miss certain things, my mother before she remarried, the farm where I grew up, but I do not think I could go back now even if I wanted to. This is home now." "I feel that way about Boston," Abigail said. "Everything I knew is there, everyone I grew up with, but I do not miss it the way I thought I would. Maybe because I never really felt like I belonged there. I was always too restless, too curious about what lay beyond the city limits." "And now you are finding out," Caleb said. "Yes," she said softly, "and it is frightening and exhilarating all at once." Their eyes met, and Caleb felt that pull again, stronger than before. He wanted to reach out to take her hand to tell her that he understood exactly what she meant. But he held back, uncertain if his feelings were returned, unwilling to complicate her new life with his own desires. It was late July when everything changed. Caleb had been working with a young mare in one of the corrals, trying to get her accustomed to the saddle, when he saw a rider approaching from town. As the man drew closer, Caleb's jaw tightened. It was Theodore Thornton, looking considerably more sober than the last time they had met. Thornton reined up outside the main house and dismounted. Caleb left the mare and walked over, positioning himself between Thornton and the house. He could see Abigail through the kitchen window, and he prayed she would stay inside. "Mr. Morgan," Thornton said, his voice cold and formal. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." "I do not have anything of yours," Caleb said evenly. "Do not play games with me," Thornton snapped. "I know Abigail Winters is here. I have had people asking questions in town. Now I am prepared to be reasonable about this. Her father's debt is a legal matter, and she has obligations to fulfill. If she comes with me peacefully, I will not press charges for her theft of family property." "What family property?" Caleb asked, his voice dangerous. "The money she used to buy her train ticket came from the Thornton family coffers," Thornton said smoothly. "Money that was advanced to her father for household expenses. Technically, she stole from us when she ran away." "That is a lie," came Abigail's voice from the doorway. Caleb turned to see her standing there, her face pale but her chin lifted defiantly. "That money was from the sale of my mother's jewelry, which my father left to me. It was mine to do with as I pleased." "That is not how my family's lawyers see it," Thornton said. "Now, you can come with me and straighten this all out in Boston, or I can involve the local law. I am sure the sheriff would be very interested to hear about a woman fleeing her legal obligations." "She does not have any legal obligations to you," Caleb said, stepping forward. "And if you try to force her, you will have a lot more to worry about than some made-up debt." Thornton's face reddened. "Are you threatening me?" "Just stating facts," Caleb said. "Now I suggest you get back on your horse and return to town. The lady has made her choice." For a moment, Thornton looked like he might argue, but then his expression changed, became calculating. "Very well," he said. "I can see I am not welcome here, but this is not over, Miss Winters. My family has considerable resources and influence even out here in the wilderness. You cannot run forever. He mounted his horse and rode away, and Caleb watched him go with a sick feeling in his stomach. He turned to find Abigail standing beside him, her face troubled. "He will not give up," she said quietly. "The Thorntons never give up. They will find a way to make my life here impossible." "Then we will find a way to stop them," Caleb said. She looked at him, something vulnerable and hopeful in her eyes. "Why are you doing this? Why are you helping me so much?" Caleb knew the answer, had known it for weeks now, but saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff with no idea if there was ground below. "Because I care about you," he said, the words rough but honest. "Because somewhere between that first day in town and now, I started falling in love with you, and the thought of you being forced into something you do not want makes me want to hit something." Abigail's breath caught. "Caleb," she whispered, and it was the first time she had used his given name. "I have been so afraid to let myself feel anything. I came here to be free, to make my own choices, and I told myself I could not afford to care about anyone or anything except building a new life." "And now," he asked, his heart hammering. "Now I think I have been lying to myself," she said. "Because I look forward to seeing you every day. Because when I am around you, I feel safer and happier than I have in years. Because I think I might be falling in love with you too." Caleb closed the distance between them in 2 strides. He cupped her face in his hands, his calloused thumbs gentle against her soft skin. "I am not a rich man," he said. "I do not have much to offer except hard work and a stubborn heart, but if you will have me, I will spend every day making sure you never regret running away to Colorado." "That is all I want," Abigail said, tears shining in her eyes. "Someone who sees me as a person, not a commodity, someone who cares about what I want." He kissed her then, soft and careful, and felt her hands come up to grip his shirt. The kiss deepened, became something more urgent, and when they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. "We need to figure out what to do about Thornton," Abigail said, practical even in the midst of emotion. "He meant what he said about involving the law. If he can convince the sheriff that I owe his family money, they could force me to go back." Caleb thought about it. "We need proof that the money was yours. Do you have anything from your father's will or your mother's jewelry?" Abigail shook her head. "Everything was left in Boston. I only took what I could carry, and I did not think to bring legal documents." "Then we need to establish that you are not running from any legal obligation," Caleb said. "Maybe we should talk to the sheriff ourselves, explain the situation before Thornton gets to him." "Or," Abigail said slowly, "we could remove the Thorntons' claim on me entirely." Caleb looked at her questioningly, and she took a breath. "If I were married, they could no longer claim I owe them anything through my father's debt. A woman's obligations transfer to her husband." "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" Caleb asked carefully. "I am saying that if we were to marry, Theodore Thornton would have no legal standing to force me to do anything," Abigail said. Her cheeks flushed. "I know it seems sudden, and I do not want you to think I am only suggesting this to solve a problem, but we have already said we have feelings for each other, and I think we could build a good life together, and I just want to be free of them, Caleb. I want to be able to live without looking over my shoulder." Caleb felt a smile spreading across his face. "Abigail Winters, that is possibly the least romantic marriage proposal I have ever heard," she laughed, a slightly hysterical edge to it. "I suppose it is. I am sorry. I am not very good at this." "Let me try," Caleb said. He took her hands in his. "Abigail, I know we have not known each other long, but I know that you are brave and strong and kind. I know that you make me want to be a better man. I know that when I think about the future, I see you in it. So yes, I will marry you to protect you from the Thorntons if that is what it takes. But more than that, I will marry you because I love you and I cannot imagine not being with you." Now Abigail was crying in earnest, and she threw her arms around his neck. "Yes," she said against his shoulder. "Yes, I will marry you." They rode into town the next morning, and by noon they were standing in front of the local minister, exchanging vows in a small ceremony with Martha and Henry Hutchins as their witnesses. Abigail wore her best dress, and Caleb had cleaned up as best he could, his hair still damp from washing. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed his bride with a mixture of joy and fierce protectiveness. They filed the marriage certificate with the county clerk that same afternoon, making sure it was properly documented. And then, because Caleb wanted to make sure Thornton got the message loud and clear, they stopped by the hotel where the man was staying. Thornton was in the lobby and his face darkened when he saw them enter. But before he could speak, Caleb handed him a copy of the marriage certificate. "As you can see," Caleb said calmly, "Abigail is now my wife. Any debts her father may have owed, any agreements he may have made, they no longer concern her. I suggest you take this information back to your family and tell them to leave us alone." Thornton stared at the document, his face cycling through shock, anger, and finally, grudging acceptance. "This is not legal," he blustered. "You cannot just marry to escape an obligation." "Actually, I can," Abigail said, stepping forward. "And I have. Now, as my husband said, I suggest you leave, Mr. Thornton. You have no further business with me." For a long moment, Thornton looked like he might argue, but then his shoulders slumped and he crumpled the certificate in his fist. "The Thorntons will not forget this," he said. "You have made powerful enemies, Mrs. Morgan." "I will take my chances," Abigail said coolly. They left the hotel and walked back into the bright sunshine of the Colorado afternoon. Caleb felt lighter than he had in days, and when he looked at Abigail, at his wife, he saw the same relief in her face. "We did it," she said wonderingly. "We actually did it." "We did," Caleb agreed. "You are free, Abigail, really free now." She stopped in the middle of the street and turned to face him, taking both his hands. "I know we did this quickly, possibly too quickly, and I know there is still so much we do not know about each other, but I meant everything I said, Caleb. I want to build a life with you. I want to see where this takes us." "So do I," he said, and kissed her again, not caring that they were standing in the middle of town where anyone could see. They spent their wedding night in a room at the Silver Spur, the same hotel where Abigail had stayed when she first arrived. It was not fancy, but it was clean and private, and when Caleb closed the door behind them, shutting out the world, he felt a nervous anticipation that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with the woman standing before him. Abigail was nervous too. He could see it in the way her hands trembled slightly as she removed her bonnet, in the way she would not quite meet his eyes. He crossed to her slowly, giving her time to tell him to stop if she wanted, and gently tilted her chin up. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he said quietly. "I know this has all happened very fast. We can take our time." "I want this," Abigail said, and her voice was steady. "I want you. I am just nervous. I have never been with a man before, and I am not sure what to do." "Neither have I," Caleb admitted, and she blinked in surprise. "Been with a woman, I mean. There was never anyone I cared about enough to want that with them, until you." Something in her face softened, and she reached up to touch his cheek. "Then we will figure it out together," she said. And they did, tentatively at first and then with growing confidence and passion. Caleb was careful with her, mindful of her innocence, and when she cried out softly in his arms, he held her close and whispered how much he loved her. Afterward they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Abigail's head on his chest, listening to each other breathe. "Do you think Thornton will really give up?" she asked into the darkness. "I do not know," Caleb said honestly, "but if he does not, we will face it together." "You are not alone anymore, Abigail." "Neither are you," she said, and he felt her smile against his skin. They returned to the ranch the next day, and if the other hands had questions about the sudden marriage, they kept them to themselves. Martha Hutchins was delighted, insisting on throwing a small celebration that evening with a special dinner, and even a few bottles of whiskey that Hutchins had been saving for a special occasion. Caleb moved his things out of the bunkhouse and into Abigail's small room off the kitchen. It was cramped, but neither of them minded. They would lie awake at night, talking softly so as not to disturb the Hutchins, learning each other's histories and dreams. Abigail told him about her childhood, about the mother she had lost, and how she had tried to be everything her father needed after that. She told him about the loneliness of being the daughter of a man who was always chasing the next business opportunity, always convinced that success was just around the corner. She told him about the moment she realized she could either let the Thorntons control her life, or she could run, and how terrifying and liberating it had been to choose herself for once. Caleb told her about his own losses, about the father who had taught him to ride and rope and be a man of honor, and how much it had hurt to watch his mother replace him so quickly. He told her about the early years out west, the mistakes he had made, the times he had nearly given up and gone back. He told her about the fight that had left him with broken ribs and a determination to never let anyone push him around again. "What was the fight about?" Abigail asked, tracing the old scar on his shoulder. "Another hand said something disrespectful about a woman in town," Caleb said. "I told him to shut his mouth. He did not take kindly to that." "And you fought him," Abigail said. "I did," Caleb admitted. "And I lost, at least according to the way I looked afterward, but he never said anything disrespectful again, and neither did anyone else when I was around." Sometimes a man has to stand up for what is right, even if it costs him. "Is that why you helped me?" Abigail asked. "Because it was the right thing to do," partly, Caleb said, "but also because I took one look at you and knew you were going to change my life." "I did not know how yet, but I knew it as sure as I know my own name." She kissed him then, long and deep, and they did not talk much more that night. August faded into September, and the aspens on the mountainsides began to turn gold. The days were still warm, but the nights carried a hint of the cold that would come. Caleb and Abigail fell into the rhythms of married life, working side by side when their duties overlapped, finding moments to steal a kiss or hold hands when no one was looking. Thornton had left town, or so the gossip from the general store reported. Some said he had gone back east, others claimed he was just in Denver. But as the weeks passed with no sign of him, Caleb began to hope that maybe the man had really given up. It was on a bright morning in late September, when Caleb was helping to bring a herd of cattle down from the high pastures for the winter, when he noticed smoke rising from the direction of the ranch. At first he thought it was just the cook fire, but then he saw how much smoke there was, billowing black and thick into the clear sky. "Fire!" someone shouted, and then they were all riding hell-bent for the ranch, pushing the cattle aside, desperate to see what was burning. As they crested the ridge above the ranch, Caleb's heart sank. The barn was ablaze, flames leaping high into the air. He could see figures running with buckets, trying to form a chain from the river, but the fire had too much of a head start. He rode straight into the chaos, leaping from his horse before it had fully stopped. "Abigail," he shouted. "Martha, where are they?" "Here," Martha called from near the house. She was safe, and Abigail was with her, holding a bucket, her face streaked with soot. Caleb felt his knees go weak with relief. "Thank God," he breathed, pulling Abigail into a quick embrace. "Are you hurt?" "No, I am fine," she said. "Caleb, there are horses in there, we have to get them out." He looked at the barn, at the flames consuming the structure, and knew it was probably suicide to go in there. But he could hear the horses screaming, and he could not just stand there and let them burn. "Stay here," he ordered Abigail, and then he was running toward the barn before she could protest. The heat hit him like a physical wall when he got close. The main doors were already engulfed, but there was a smaller side entrance that was not yet burning. He wrapped his bandana around his face and plunged inside. The smoke was thick, choking, and he could barely see. But he knew this barn like the back of his hand, and he moved by instinct toward the stalls. The horses were panicking, kicking at their enclosures, their eyes rolling white with terror. Caleb got the first stall open, and the horse bolted past him, fleeing toward the light and safety. The second horse was harder. too frightened to move until Caleb grabbed its halter and physically dragged it forward. By the time he got to the third stall, part of the roof was starting to collapse, burning timbers falling with crashes that sent sparks flying. He got the third horse out, and the fourth, and then he was stumbling back toward the door, his lungs burning, his eyes streaming. Just as he reached the opening, something gave way above him with a tremendous crack. He looked up to see a beam falling, and he threw himself forward. He almost made it. The beam caught him across the back and shoulder, driving him to the ground with brutal force. Pain exploded through him, white-hot and all-consuming, and for a moment he could not breathe, could not think. Then hands were on him, dragging him away from the burning building, and he heard Abigail's voice, frantic and terrified. "Caleb, oh God, Caleb, please be all right." He managed to draw in a breath and then another. The pain was excruciating, but he was alive and breathing, and that was something. "I am okay," he rasped. "The horses, they got out," someone said. "You got them all out, Morgan, you damn fool." He tried to smile at that, but it came out as more of a grimace. Abigail was crying, her hands fluttering over him as if she did not know where to touch without causing more pain. "I am all right," he said again, reaching up to touch her face. "It is not as bad as it looks, but it was bad." He had cracked ribs and a badly bruised shoulder, and it hurt to breathe, let alone move. Martha Hutchins and Abigail got him into the house and onto a bed, and Martha, who had tended her share of injuries over the years, bound his ribs and made him drink some whiskey for the pain. "You are lucky you did not break your fool neck," she scolded, but her hands were gentle. "What were you thinking, running into a burning building like that?" "I was thinking about the horses," Caleb said, and then he looked at Hutchins, who was standing in the doorway. "I am sorry, boss." "I know the barn is a total loss. The barn can be rebuilt," Hutchins said gruffly. "And you saved the horses, which is more important. You did good, Morgan." Praise from Hutchins was rare, and Caleb felt a warm glow that had nothing to do with the whiskey. But then Hutchins' expression darkened. "There is something else you should know. We found what started the fire. It was not an accident." Caleb struggled to sit up, ignoring the protests of his ribs. "What do you mean?" "I mean, someone said it deliberately," Hutchins said. "We found rags soaked in kerosene stacked near the back wall. Someone wanted that barn to burn." Abigail had gone very pale. "Thornton," she whispered. "It has to be. He said the Thorntons would not forget." "We do not know that for sure," Caleb said, but even as he spoke, he knew she was probably right. Who else would want to hurt them? "I am going into town to talk to the sheriff," Hutchins said. "This is arson, and if Thornton is behind it, he is going to jail." But when Hutchins and several of the hands rode into town, they found that Theodore Thornton had checked out of his hotel 2 days earlier. No one knew where he had gone, and the stage driver confirmed that he had not taken the coach back east. He had simply disappeared. "He is still out there," Abigail said that night as she sat beside Caleb's bed, holding his hand. "He tried to kill you, Caleb. He tried to destroy everything you have because I chose you over him." "We do not know for sure it was him," Caleb said, though he did not believe his own words. "Who else could it be?" Abigail said, and there was guilt in her voice. "This is my fault. I brought this trouble down on you, on everyone here." "No," Caleb said firmly, struggling to sit up despite the pain it caused. "No, Abigail, you listen to me. You did not do anything wrong. You chose to be free, to live your own life, and if that makes some people angry, that is their problem, not yours. We will find Thornton, and we will make sure he answers for what he did." "But what if we cannot find him?" Abigail said. "What if he keeps doing things like this, hurting people to get back at me?" "Then we will deal with it," Caleb said. "Together. That is what marriage means, Abigail. We face things together for better or worse." She leaned down and kissed him, careful not to jostle his injuries. "I love you," she said. "I am so grateful you were not killed today." "Takes more than a burning barn to kill me," Caleb said with a weak smile, "though I do not recommend the experience." The next few weeks were difficult. Caleb healed slowly, his ribs aching every time he moved, and he chafed at being confined to bed rest. Abigail barely left his side, reading to him from the books she had brought from Boston, talking to him about everything and nothing just to keep him company. The sheriff investigated the fire, but without Thornton to question, there was little he could do. The man had vanished, and no one seemed to know where he had gone. Caleb found himself looking over his shoulder constantly, waiting for the next attack, but weeks turned into a month and nothing happened. "Maybe he gave up," Abigail said hopefully. "Maybe he decided we were not worth the trouble." "Maybe," Caleb said, but he did not believe it. It was early November when Caleb finally felt well enough to return to light work. The barn had been rebuilt with help from neighboring ranches, a smaller structure but sturdy and sound. The herd had been moved to winter pastures, and the ranch was settling into the quiet rhythms of the cold season. Caleb and Abigail had been talking about their future, about what they wanted beyond just surviving. Caleb had saved a little money over the years, and Hutchins had mentioned that there was a piece of land adjacent to the Double H that might be available for purchase in the spring. It was not much, just 100 acres or so, but it would be theirs, a place to build their own ranch and their own future. "We could have a real house," Abigail said, her eyes bright with possibility. "With a proper bedroom and a kitchen and maybe even a parlor, somewhere we could raise children." "You want children?" Caleb asked, touched by the thought. "Someday," Abigail said. "Not right away, but yes, I would like to have a family with you, Caleb. I would like to build something lasting." "So would I," he said, pulling her close. "So would I." It was a cold afternoon in late November when the sheriff rode out to the ranch with news. Caleb and Abigail were in the kitchen with Martha, preparing dinner, when they heard horses in the yard. Caleb went to the door and saw Sheriff Coleman dismounting, his expression grave. "Sheriff," Caleb said, stepping outside, "what brings you out here?" "I have news about Theodore Thornton," Coleman said. "Thought you would want to hear it directly." Abigail appeared in the doorway and Caleb reached back to take her hand. "What kind of news?" "He is dead," Coleman said bluntly. "Got himself killed in a gunfight in Denver about 2 weeks ago. Apparently he got drunk and picked a fight with the wrong person. The other man was a professional gambler, and when Thornton pulled a gun, the gambler was faster." Caleb felt Abigail's hand tighten on his. "Are you sure it is him?" "Positive," Coleman said. "The Denver sheriff sent a telegram with a description, and it matches. They also found some letters in his room, including correspondence with his family back east. Seems like he was in a bad way, drinking heavily, obsessing over what happened with you two." "Did they mention the fire?" Caleb asked. "No direct evidence," Coleman admitted, "but there were some notes that suggest he was planning some kind of revenge." "It is not proof, but it is enough to convince me he was behind it." Abigail let out a shaky breath. "So it is over. He is really gone." "He is gone," Coleman confirmed. "I know it is not justice exactly, but at least you do not have to worry about him anymore." After the sheriff left, Caleb and Abigail stood on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. It was bitterly cold, the first real cold of winter, and snow was starting to fall in soft, lazy flakes. "I do not know how I am supposed to feel," Abigail said quietly. "I did not want him dead, I just wanted him to leave me alone." "I know," Caleb said. "But at least now you are truly free, no more looking over your shoulder, no more worrying about what might happen next." "Free," Abigail repeated, and then she turned to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Do you know what I want to do with my freedom?" "What?" he asked, holding her close. "I want to live," she said. "Really live. I want to build that house with you and work that land and have those children. I want to wake up every morning and know that I chose this life, that I chose you, and that I would choose you again every single day." Caleb felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You have me," he said. "For as long as you want me, Abigail, I am yours." They went inside then, back into the warm kitchen where Martha was finishing dinner and Hutchins was reading the week-old newspaper by the fire. It was a simple scene, domestic and peaceful, and Caleb felt a contentment he had never known before. This was home. This woman beside him was home. Winter closed in hard after that, with snow piling up in drifts and the temperature dropping so low that water froze in the buckets overnight. But inside the ranch house, there was warmth and companionship. Caleb and Abigail spent the long evenings teaching each other things. He taught her to play poker, and she taught him to read better, patiently helping him work through the books she loved. It was during one of those evenings, when they were alone in their small room and Abigail was unpacking her trunk to reorganize her clothes for the winter, that Caleb noticed something fall from between some folded dresses. He bent to pick it up and found himself holding a small, leather-bound book. "What is this?" he asked, holding it up. Abigail looked over and her expression softened. "Oh, that is my memory book. I had forgotten I brought it with me." "Memory book?" Caleb asked, curious. "It is where I kept things that were important to me," she said, taking it from him and sitting down on the bed. "Silly little mementos. I started it when I was young and I just kept adding to it over the years." She opened the book, and Caleb saw that it was filled with pressed flowers, ribbons, scraps of fabric, and pieces of paper with notes written on them. Abigail turned the pages slowly, a wistful smile on her face. "This is from my mother's garden," she said, pointing to a dried rose. She grew the most beautiful roses, deep red and fragrant. This was the last one that bloomed before she died. Caleb sat beside her, drawn by the glimpse into her past. "Tell me more," he said. "This," she said, touching a pale blue ribbon, "was from my 10th birthday. My father threw me a party and all the girls wore ribbons in their hair. I thought I was so grown up." She turned another page and there was a pressed violet. "This was from a boy who liked me when I was 16. His name was Thomas and he brought me wildflowers every Sunday after church. I thought I might marry him someday." "What happened?" Caleb asked. "His family moved to Philadelphia," Abigail said, "and I realized I did not actually love him. I just loved the idea of someone caring enough to bring me flowers." There were more flowers, each one carefully preserved between the pages. A daisy from a picnic, a lily from a funeral, a sprig of lavender from the market. And with each one, Abigail told him the story, painting a picture of her life before she had come west. Then she turned to a page near the back and Caleb saw something different. It was not a flower but a feather, small and gray. "What is that from?" he asked. Abigail's smile turned bittersweet. "That is from the bird my father gave me when I was 12, right after my mother died. It was a canary and it sang the most beautiful songs. I named it Sunshine because its feathers were so bright and cheerful. It helped me through that terrible time, having something to care for." "What happened to it?" Caleb asked gently. "It died 2 years later," Abigail said. "And I was heartbroken all over again. But I kept this feather to remember how much joy it brought me, even if it was only for a short time." She turned to the last page with something pressed inside, and Caleb felt his breath catch. It was a wildflower, pink and delicate, and he recognized it immediately. "That is a Colorado columbine," he said. "Where did you get that?" Abigail looked at him, and her eyes were bright with tears. "Do you remember that day last August when we rode up into the high meadows to check on the cattle? And we stopped by that stream for lunch," Caleb remembered. It had been a perfect day, warm but not hot, with a breeze carrying the scent of pine. They had sat on a flat rock by the water and eaten bread and cheese while the horses grazed nearby. "You picked this for me," Abigail said softly. "You said the flower reminded you of me because it was beautiful but also strong, able to survive in harsh conditions. And I pressed it in this book because I wanted to remember that moment forever. The moment I knew for certain that I loved you." Caleb felt something break open in his chest. He took the book from her and looked at the flower, preserved so carefully, and thought about all the stories behind all the petals in this book. Each one was a piece of her history, a thread in the tapestry of her life. "Tell me the story behind every petal here," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Tell me everything, Abigail, I want to know it all." So she did. They stayed up late into the night, the fire burning low, while Abigail went through every single item in her memory book. She told him about the jasmine from her mother's perfume, the oak leaf from the tree she used to climb as a child, the piece of lace from her first ball gown. She told him about joy and sorrow, about friendships lost and dreams deferred. And when she finally closed the book, she looked at him with such love that it took his breath away. "Those are all the things that made me who I am," she said. "All the petals, all the stories, but this, right here with you, this is the beginning of a whole new chapter." "Then we will fill it with new stories," Caleb said. "New flowers, new memories, better ones." "The best ones," Abigail agreed and kissed him. The winter passed slowly, as winters in the mountains do, but it was not lonely or difficult because Caleb and Abigail had each other. They talked about the land they wanted to buy, drew up plans for the house they would build. Abigail sketched pictures of rooms and furniture, and Caleb calculated how many cattle they could start with, how they would build their herd. When spring finally came, melting the snow and turning the meadows green, they rode into town to meet with the land agent. The property adjacent to the Double H was still available, 120 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through it. The price was fair, and with their combined savings plus a small loan from Hutchins, they were able to purchase it. "We are landowners," Abigail said wonderingly as they rode back to the ranch with the deed in hand. "We actually own a piece of Colorado." "We do," Caleb said, grinning. "And now the real work begins." They broke ground on the house in late April, and the entire ranch pitched in to help. It was not going to be a grand house, but it would be solid and comfortable, with 2 bedrooms and a real kitchen and a porch facing the mountains. Caleb worked alongside the other men, raising walls and fitting beams, while Abigail helped Martha prepare meals for the workers. By July, the house was finished enough to move into, though there was still work to be done on the interior. On their first night in their own home, Caleb carried Abigail over the threshold, both of them laughing like children. "Welcome home, Mrs. Morgan," he said, setting her down in the middle of the empty parlor. "Welcome home, Mr. Morgan," she replied, and they stood together, looking around at the bare walls and rough floors, seeing not what was but what would be. They furnished the house slowly, piece by piece. A bed frame that Caleb built himself. A table and chairs purchased in town. Curtains that Abigail sewed from fabric Martha helped her pick out. Each addition made it more theirs, more real. In August, they celebrated their first wedding anniversary. Martha insisted on hosting a dinner at the Double H, and it turned into a party with music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. Caleb danced with Abigail under the stars, holding her close as someone played a fiddle and the other couples swayed around them. "Happy?" he asked, his lips close to her ear. "So happy," she said. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be." "Me too," he said. "You changed my life, Abigail, made it better than I ever thought possible." "You changed mine too," she said. "You saved me, Caleb, in every way that matters." It was in September, a year after the barn fire, that Abigail told him she was pregnant. They were sitting on their porch watching the sunset, and she had been quiet all evening, a small smile playing at her lips. "I have something to tell you," she said finally. Caleb looked at her, seeing something new in her expression. "What is it?" "I am with child," she said simply. "Martha helped me figure it out. I am about 3 months along, I think. The baby should come in March." Caleb felt like the world had tilted on its axis. "A baby," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," Abigail said, and now there were tears in her eyes. "Are you happy? I know we talked about children, but I did not expect it to happen so soon." Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her as carefully as if she were made of glass. "I am so happy," he said. "Abigail, you have made me the happiest man in Colorado." The months that followed were both exciting and terrifying. Abigail bloomed with the pregnancy, her face glowing with health even as her body changed. Caleb found himself constantly worried, afraid something would go wrong, but Martha assured him that Abigail was strong and healthy and there was no reason to expect complications. Winter came again, and Abigail grew large with the child. They spent the long evenings preparing, sewing tiny clothes and setting up a cradle in the second bedroom. Caleb read everything he could find about babies and childbirth, determined to be ready when the time came. The baby came early on a cold morning in late February. Abigail woke Caleb before dawn, her face tight with pain, and told him it was time. He rode like the devil to fetch Martha, who came with her medical bag and a calm competence that steadied his nerves. The labor was long and difficult. Caleb paced the parlor while Martha and another ranch wife tended to Abigail in the bedroom. He could hear her cries of pain, and it tore at him, made him feel helpless and useless. But finally, as the sun was setting, he heard a new sound. A baby's cry, thin and angry and absolutely perfect. Martha emerged from the bedroom, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy boy, and your wife is fine, just exhausted." Caleb brushed past her into the bedroom. Abigail was propped up in bed, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale but radiant. And in her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Caleb approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. He looked down at the baby, at the small red face and dark hair, the tiny fists waving in the air, and felt love so powerful it brought him to his knees. "He is perfect," he said, his voice breaking. "Abigail, he is perfect. He has your nose," she said with a tired laugh. "And I think he has my stubbornness, based on how long he made me work to bring him into the world." Caleb reached out and gently touched his son's cheek, marveling at how soft the skin was. What should we name him? They had talked about names, but nothing had seemed quite right. Now, looking at this new life they had created together, Abigail said, "William, after my father. He made mistakes, but he loved me in his way, and Morgan for your last name, but also for new beginnings." "William Morgan," Caleb said, testing the name. "I like it. Welcome to the world, Will." The baby opened his eyes then, dark and unfocused, and Caleb felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. This was his son. His and Abigail's. A new life, a new generation, proof that they had built something lasting. The next few months were exhausting and wonderful. William was a fussy baby, demanding attention at all hours, but Caleb and Abigail took it in stride. They took turns walking him when he cried at night, sang to him, marveled over every tiny change and development. By the time summer came, Will was starting to smile and laugh, and Caleb thought there was no better sound in the world than his son's laughter. They took him outside on warm days, letting him feel the sun on his face and the breeze in his hair, and Caleb would tell him stories about the ranch and the mountains and all the adventures they would have together. Business at their small ranch was growing. They had started with 50 head of cattle and a handful of horses, but through hard work and careful management, they were building something sustainable. Hutchins had been generous with advice and assistance, and several of the other ranchers in the area had also lent their support. It was a hard life, but a good one. Caleb rose before dawn to tend the animals, spent his days mending fences and checking on the herd, and came home to a wife and son who filled his life with purpose and joy. Abigail managed the house and helped with the ranch books, proving to have a head for numbers that surprised everyone. In the evenings, after Will was asleep and the work was done, they would sit on the porch and talk about their day, about their dreams for the future. Sometimes Abigail would bring out her memory book and they would add new items to it. A wildflower from their land, a small stone from the creek, a piece of ribbon from Will's christening gown. "Every petal tells a story," Abigail said one evening as she carefully placed a pressed flower between the pages. "And we are writing new ones every day." "The best stories," Caleb agreed, pulling her close. Years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the growing of their family. When Will was 3, Abigail gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, a beautiful baby girl with her mother's green eyes. 2 years after that came another son, James, who was quieter than his siblings but just as loved. The ranch prospered. They added more land, built a bigger barn, increased their herd. Caleb's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled cattleman grew, and people came from surrounding areas to buy horses he had trained. Abigail became known for her generosity and her skill with healing herbs, often riding out to help neighbors when someone was sick or injured. But it was not all easy. There were hard winters that killed off part of the herd, dry summers that left the grass brown and brittle. There were illnesses and accidents, moments when they feared they might lose everything they had built. But they faced it all together, and somehow they always managed to come through. Will grew into a tall, serious boy who loved working with the horses. Sarah was bright and curious, always asking questions and getting into everything. James was the peacemaker, gentle and thoughtful, happiest when everyone around him was happy. Caleb watched his children grow with a mixture of pride and wonder. He taught Will to rope and ride, showed Sarah how to track animals in the woods, held James when the boy was scared of thunder. And every night, he thanked whatever powers might be listening that he had been standing outside that hotel the day Abigail Winters stepped off the stagecoach. When Will was 10, he asked his parents how they had met. They were sitting around the dinner table, and Sarah immediately chimed in that she wanted to hear the story too. Caleb and Abigail looked at each other, smiling. "It is a long story," Abigail said. "We have time," Will said. So they told them, taking turns to share the tale. About Abigail running away from Boston, about Caleb helping her that first day, about Theodore Thornton and the fire and the decision to get married. They left out some of the harder parts, the fear and the danger, but they told enough that the children understood. "So you married Mom to protect her?" Will asked Caleb. "At first, yes," Caleb said honestly, "but I also married her because I loved her. Because I could not imagine my life without her." "That is very romantic," Sarah said, sighing dramatically in the way 10-year-old girls do. "It is," James agreed quietly. That night, after the children were in bed, Abigail brought out her memory book. It was fuller now, packed with years of memories. She opened it to the page with the Colorado columbine, the flower Caleb had given her all those years ago. "Do you remember what you said when you saw this?" she asked. "I said I wanted to know the story behind every petal," Caleb said. "And now we have so many more stories," Abigail said, "so many more petals to press and preserve." "And many more to come," Caleb said. "We are not done yet, Abigail, not by a long shot." She laughed and kissed him, and they added a new flower to the book. A wild rose from their garden, pink and perfect, symbol of a love that had grown from a chance meeting into something strong and lasting. More years passed. Will grew into a young man and started courting a girl from a neighboring ranch. Sarah developed a passion for teaching and began helping the younger children in the area learn to read. James discovered he had a talent for woodworking and started making beautiful furniture that people admired. Caleb and Abigail grew older together, their hair graying, their bodies marked by years of hard work. But their love remained constant, a steady flame that warmed them through every season. When Caleb was 50, he and Abigail took a trip back east. They had talked about it for years, and finally they made it happen. They visited Boston, saw the places where Abigail had grown up. She showed him her father's old business, now owned by someone else. They visited her mother's grave and left flowers. They also stopped by the Thornton estate, though only to look from the street. The family was still there, still wealthy and powerful, but they had no claim on Abigail anymore. She was Mrs. Morgan, wife of a successful Colorado rancher, mother of 3 wonderful children. The girl who had run away was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her own worth. On the train back to Colorado, Abigail leaned against Caleb's shoulder and said, "Thank you for taking me home." "Colorado is home," Caleb said. "I know," she said. "But I needed to see Boston one more time to prove to myself that I made the right choice." "Did you?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "The best choice of my life," she said. "I would do it all again in a heartbeat." They returned to the ranch to find that Will had proposed to his sweetheart and she had accepted. The wedding was held that autumn, a joyful celebration with half the county in attendance. Caleb walked the bride down the aisle since her own father had passed, and felt a bittersweet pride as he gave her hand to his son. Grandchildren followed. Will and his wife gave them 2 boys and a girl. Sarah eventually married a teacher from Denver and had twins. James took his time but finally found a woman who appreciated his quiet strength, and they had a son. Caleb and Abigail delighted in their grandchildren, spoiling them shamelessly and passing on stories of the old days when Colorado was still wild and untamed. They pressed flowers for each grandchild, adding them to the memory book that had become a family treasure. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. There was food and music and dancing, and Caleb found himself surrounded by the life he and Abigail had built together. Children and grandchildren, friends and neighbors, all gathered to honor their love. That evening, as the party wound down and people began to leave, Caleb and Abigail slipped away to their favorite spot on the porch. They sat together, holding hands, watching the sun set behind the mountains they had loved for so long. 30 years, Abigail said softly. Can you believe it? Sometimes it feels like yesterday, Caleb said. Other times it feels like we have always been together. I was so scared that day I got off the stagecoach, Abigail said. I had no idea what I was doing or where I was going, I just knew I had to get away. And I was just a cowboy looking for supplies, Caleb said. Never imagined my life was about to change completely. Do you ever regret it? Abigail asked, taking a chance on a strange woman with too much baggage. Caleb turned to look at her, at this woman who had been his partner and his love for 3 decades. Her face was lined now, her hands worn from work, but to him she was still the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Not for one single second, he said. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Abigail Morgan. You and our children and this life we built together. If I could go back and do it all over again, I would not change a thing. Tears shimmered in her eyes. I love you, she said. More than all the flowers in all the meadows, more than all the stars in the sky. You gave me freedom and love and a home. You gave me everything. You gave me just as much, Caleb said. You taught me what it means to really love someone, to build a life with someone. You made me better than I ever thought I could be. They kissed then, gentle and sweet, a kiss that held 30 years of love and partnership and devotion. And as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars began to appear, they sat together in comfortable silence, content in the knowledge that they had found exactly what they were meant to find. The memory book sat on the table beside them, full of pressed flowers and faded ribbons and all the stories of their life together. Each petal was a moment captured in time, a memory preserved. And as Caleb held Abigail's hand and looked out at the land they had made their own, he knew that their story was far from over. There would be more flowers to press, more memories to make, more grandchildren to spoil and more adventures to have. More sunsets to watch and more quiet moments of contentment. The story of the cowboy and the woman who ran away had become the story of a family, of a legacy, of a love that had stood the test of time. And in the end, that was the best story of all.